We finally get some Vcore 95 content up on this channel. I don't know about all of you, but I'm excited. Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets and Runners. Now last week we released our review of the Percept 97, and in it I mentioned that we had some pretty cool comparisons coming down the pipeline. Comparing it to the Vcore 95 was kind of the first one I wanted to do for a couple reasons. For one, ever since the new Vcores came out, I've barely spent any time on court with the 95, so it kind of gave me a good excuse to go out and hit with it. The second reason, and this is going to answer the question that a lot of you are thinking, why is this man not comparing the Percept 97 to the Vcore 98? But these two rackets are actually very comparable while also being very different. That's because a lot of these two rackets' positive and negative characteristics are actually pretty similar, but because of the different design elements on either frame, they accomplish that in two pretty unique ways. We'll get more into all of that in a second here, but that's pretty much why we're comparing the Percept 97 to the Vcore 95 and not the 98. The 97 might be technically closer in head size to the 98, but in terms of overall playability, it's much closer to the 95. These two are what I would call true modern players rackets, and the Vcore 98 is what I would call a true modern spin racket. Now, as usual, of course, before we go on, you can check out either of these two rackets on our website, racketsandrunners.ca, and please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know down in the comment section what you want me to cover next. There's a pretty exciting video for next week, no spoilers, but it might be in a different setting. That's all I'm going to say. But anyways, back to these two rackets. Here's what we're working with in terms of specs. The Vcore has a 95 square inch head size, the Percept has a 97 square inch head size. They both weigh 310 grams. The Vcore has a 16x20 string pattern, the Percept a 1619, and the beam thickness on the Vcore is 22 millimeters, tapering into 21 in the throat, and it's 21 millimeters constant on the Percept. So on paper, they're obviously pretty similar rackets, and we're going to have to get real technical to get to the bottom of their differences. So for those of you that like that style of video, I think you're going to like this one. Let's get into it. We're going to start with the two most obvious playability differences here, and first off, we have spin. In our Percept review, I said that racket had impressive spin for a 97 square inch control frame, and I maintained that. But if the Percept spin is impressive, then the Vcore 95 spin is otherworldly unbelievable. It's actually crazy how spin friendly this racket is considering its small head size and 16x20 string pattern. Now the string pattern itself isn't that dense, but the spin on this racket is more along the lines of 100 square inch spin rackets than anything anywhere near this head size. Every time I try one of these new Vcores, I'm more and more impressed with their silicone oil infused grommets. In terms of snapback amplification, it's a technology that is just as effective as older Aero's wide spin grommets without nearly as many of the inconsistency issues. You get crazy amounts of string movement, which makes for really good feedback when you do hit a proper spinny ground stroke, and that just helps the Vcore 95 lend itself really well to a spinny style of play. It's also potentially the fastest racket I've ever tried. This new shape is extremely well aerodynamically optimized, and the fact that it's a 95 just adds to that quick feel, which means you can get tons of racket head speed on contact for more spin. Now, like I said, Percept, very impressive for spin. It's the most spin-friendly Vcore Pro-esque racket that I've used with that new stiff racket face design, but it just can't compete with a true spin monster like the Vcore 95. If the Vcore 95 is clearly ahead in spin, the Percept is that much better in terms of feel. The Vcore 95 feels good, don't get me wrong, it's as you would expect from a racket with a small head size, but playing these two rackets back to back, the Vcore 95 feels significantly more muted and dull than the Percept. It's now the second racket with vibration dampening mesh that I've directly compared to the Percept, and that's just helped reinforce to me just how much better this new servo filter dampening tech is for feel. The Percept's feel really is top tier. The sweet spot is extremely well defined, and you get fantastic feedback on contact with that flexible throat and less intrusive dampening tech. It really is the first Yonex racket in a long time where I felt total connection to the ball. Now again, I don't want anyone thinking that the feel on the Vcore 95 isn't good, because it is, but if we're comparing it to a racket that has some of the best feel you can get right now, it simply isn't as good. Okay, so up until now, things have been pretty clearly defined between these two rackets, but this is where things are going to take a slightly more ambiguous turn, so throw on your technical caps, and if I start making no sense, ask me for clarification in the comments. I'm always happy to answer because I do tend to go on some pretty wild tangents sometimes. I'm very much aware of that. Both of these rackets have fantastic control profiles, but at least in the traditional sense, the Percept has the 95B. Feel plays a huge role in determining a racket's control, and because feel has improved so much on the Percept, so has its control profile. Better feel means a better understanding of where the ball is in the string bed and how it's going to respond when it shoots out, so you have a better sensation of control with the Percept. Also, with its constant and thin beam, the launch and response is more consistent on the Percept than on the 95, which also helps make its flat directional control a bit better. The Vcore 95's unique shape has a lot of upside, but one of the minor downsides is that it's a little bit less consistent. This is a bigger problem on the 98 and a way bigger problem on the 100, but the squared off hoop here with the really open string bed in the sweet spot up there just makes for a slightly less solid response on contact. Now, in terms of stability, the two rackets are truly top tier, and it's really difficult to pick a winner. The Percept 97 is more so stable because of this new stiff racket face design technology in the graphite's layup, which makes the face a little bit more sturdy and stable and the throat a little bit more flexible. And the Vcore 95 is more so stable because of this really cool new design that Yonex went for, especially in the throat, which just makes it remarkably stable. I've been over this in a few videos already, but Yonex totally redesigned the throat on the new Vcores that makes them rock solid on impact. It works really well on the 98 and the 100, but it seems to be even more effective on the 95. This racket really is remarkably stable on contact, especially when you consider how quick and whippy it is. I think if you're looking at all the new Vcores, the 95 has to be the most impressive one. This really is an amazing racket. All right, now power is where things are going to get really interesting because I can't really say point blank which one is more powerful. Now, obviously, neither of these two rackets are really made for power, but I mentioned earlier that these are modern control rackets, and if you have the word modern in your naming criteria, you have to pack a bit of a punch. I know I'm kind of making that up, but it makes sense in my head, and it makes sense with these two rackets, so I'm rolling with it. On average, in terms of depth and power, the Percept is a little bit more powerful than the Vcore, but it's very close. The 2 square inches in the head definitely add a little bit of easy depth, but it's more so because this racket complements a flatter style, meaning you're going to be punching a little bit more into the ball, whereas on the Vcore, you're going to be brushing up for more spinny but less penetrative shots. Here's the thing though, the Percept has a constant beam, so a very traditional flex pattern. The harder you hit, the more the racket's going to flex on contact, which isn't really the case on the 95. I know it's a little bit of a difficult idea to grasp that hitting harder isn't going to make the frame flex more, but that's kind of what Yonex developed with this super cool design, and honestly, I'm really impressed. You'll notice this most when you're going for huge put-away shots. You get this very sturdy sensation where you feel like all the energy you're putting into swinging the racket is directly translated into power into the ball. So basically, the Percept might be a tiny bit more powerful on average, but then that huge power generating potential on the Vcore 95 means that I have to call it a tie. Now, some of you might be starting to sense a theme with this comparison. The Percept is really standard and normal in this instance, but then there's this really cool, unique thing about the Vcore 95 that makes it stand out compared to the Percept and other rackets. That's kind of what it is between these two. The Percept is an elite control racket in the truest sense of the word, with a slightly modern twist now that it has that stiff racket face design. Control rackets are as old as time, and the reason why they're still so popular is because their consistency and predictability gives players total confidence. That's what you get with the Percept. The Vcore is still very good for control, but it has significantly more variety in terms of spin and power, which A, makes it a real weapon in the right player's hands, and B, makes it a racket that's a heck of a lot of fun to use. If you want to slow the rally down by going for one of those loopy, spinny ground strokes that resets the point that Alcaraz is kind of starting to make his own, the racket has the swing pattern and spin potential to do that. If you want to absolutely annihilate the ball with a cross-court winner, which, now that I'm thinking about it, is also a shot that Alcaraz is starting to make his own, the racket has the power-generating potential to do that, and it really makes you want to hit that type of shot. Now that I think about it, Alcaraz should be using the Vcore 95. Although he does seem to be doing just fine with the Aero 98. But anyways, the Vcore 95 is extremely unique in its playability, which I know I've said about the 100 and the 98 before, but what separates the 95 from those two rackets is that it doesn't suffer nearly as much in control and consistency. There's always been that slight problem with this new shape on those two rackets, and while it's not completely gone here, it's much, much better. Honestly, this really is an incredible frame. I'm so happy I finally got to give it a real go. I wouldn't call it an easy racket to use. It is a 95 after all, but if you give yourself the right amount of time to get used to it, there is so much potential to unpack here. So to kind of summarize it, if you have narrowed it down to Yonex's most controlled 16 mainers, go for the Percept if you want the most consistency, and the Vcore 95 if you want the most variety, but honestly, you can't really go wrong with either. And by the way, in terms of user friendliness, they're both very, very similar. The Percept might be a tiny bit more user friendly with that bigger head size and more consistency, but honestly, for a 95, this thing is crazy user friendly. For now though, that is going to be the end of this video. I had a ton of fun comparing these two rackets. Yonex, you never cease to amaze me. You're never scared of really going for it with your releases, and these two rackets are absolutely awesome, and your whole lineup in general right now is really good. So great work. Thank you all so much for watching. Remember that if you do want to demo either of these two frames, you can come visit us in store, or you can check them out online at racketsandrunners.ca.